It's 10-1. That's right. The voters of the Commonwealth of Virginia on last week, Tuesday, approved a constitutional referendum in order to give the power to the Virginia General Assembly to redraw congressional lines temporarily that would give Democrats at least a 4 congressional district advantage, making it 10-1 from 6-5. Now, many across the Commonwealth who opposed it and across the country are now claiming foul ball and are calling for the courts to overturn this measure. But it looks like the people of Virginia have spoken, and this measure is going to go forward pending court ruling. What does this mean for the Commonwealth? What does this mean for the country? And what does this mean for the balance of government in Congress midterm election and the Trump agenda? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for After the Vote, Virginia Redistricting Referendum. As always, I want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, here as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. Listen, you all have been joining us and listening as we've covered this series for now 6 weeks, while we've delved into not just redistricting, but the reason behind it, what the measure was about, the opposition, their claims as the reason why it should not have been done, and also the leading up to the vote. Now it is after the vote. Virginia has spoken. You know, it was a very exciting time for us here in the Commonwealth across the board, because not only were Virginians locked in on this issue at a historic level, but also the entire country, because the balance of Congress is in the balance, right? So with that, you know, as I always say, as Virginia goes, so goes the rest of the country. And this has proved to be so far true from here on out. Now, this referendum has definitely put individuals on notice, of course, the Republican Party and their efforts to keep the House of Congress with the very slim margins that they have. But it's also reached all the way to the White House, and the president himself calling this vote bogus, and also calling the governor herself, her agenda, not a good one. So with that, we're going to start from the top, and we're going to look at, you know, how we got here, the numbers, the turnout, the impact, and then also what this means moving forward and what is going to happen next, because we do have some court challenges. Now, of course, those of you that listen to this show and are a fan of WNSB, Hot 91, Solar VA, and this show, A State of Water, you know that I had the great opportunity and honor, which I'm so grateful to the people of Hampton Roads and the Commonwealth for giving me space in order to deliver not just analysis, but also to give information so that you can make a more well-informed decision, and explaining and breaking down to the public why we're doing what we're doing and why your vote is important. So over the course of election night, I was able to provide analysis on our CBS affiliate, WTKR, also WVEC, Channel 13, our ABC affiliate, as it relates to this referendum. So thank you all for tuning in. And I'd like to thank all of the broadcasters and the stations that entrust me and have done so for the last decade, especially with WTKR Channel 3 CBS affiliate. So how do we get here, right? Why are we even looking at redistricting? What does it even really mean? Well, of course we know. In July of last year, 2025, the President of the United States requested Texas to give him 5 more seats. This was to enable the Republicans in order to have an easier opportunity to be reelected. So he thought. So with that, Texas obliged, of course, and they did this 20 years ago in 2006. However, the court said it was unconstitutional. Now, normally this would be a decade drawing, once in a decade, of course, at the end of the U.S. Census. However, this is what we've called mid-decade redistricting, and this is something that's never happened before, unprecedented, because, again, it's been against the Constitution. However, after Texas redrew their lines by the state legislators in Texas, Republican-led, dominant, and signed into law by a Republican governor, the Supreme Court ruled that it was, after it was challenged by Democrats and opponents, ruled that it was constitutional. Now, what does this mean? This means this is an about face of the court itself 20 years ago. Yes, elections do matter because from 2006 to now, 3 of the appointees on the current Supreme Court have been by this president, which has turned and pushed this court to an extreme right, ultra conservative. Now, with that being the case, that gave, of course, 5 more seats to Republicans ahead of midterm elections. Well, the state of California answered the call. However, what they did is that they redrew lines, but presented the map before the voters, called Proposition 60. And yes, the voters overwhelmingly supported that measure in California. So therefore, balance was struck again in Congress the way that it was prior to Texas redrawing their lines. Well, the states of Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio answered the call of the president, giving Republicans 4 more seats, a 4-seat advantage ahead of midterm elections. Well, it was up to the Commonwealth of Virginia. They decided to put their hat in the ring and enter the redistricting arms race. So therefore, the General Assembly, led by the Democrats, redrew lines and put the referendum before the people. And the voters voted. Now, with this, we find where this particular election saw over 3.1 million people come out and vote. Now, according to voter data, Virginia elections voter data, if you look and compare this, 3.1 million, not on an election of a person, but on a question, a referendum, record-breaking numbers. What does that mean? Over 3.4 million people voted for the governor last year, 2025. Historic election. 2 women at the top of the ticket. 1 black, 1 white, leading their respective parties. A woman was going to be the governor of the Commonwealth. And yes, Abigail Spanberger was elected that woman to lead the Commonwealth. First in 419 years. So with that, this election, well, not even election, but this voting on this question was right behind that historic election at over 3.1 million voters. That's record breaking. Over one question, yes or no. And it really simply boiled down to a very simple issue. If you're satisfied with the president and the Republican Congress and what they're doing, moving the country in that direction, you just voted no. And you wanted to keep your Republican representatives. But if you weren't satisfied with the president and the administration in a Republican-controlled Congress and how they're moving the country, then just simply vote yes. And that's what voters did. So they responded. Now, there was a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. And, some of my colleagues call it just flat out lies, where you would get a prominent Democrat like former President Barack Obama, current Governor Abigail Spanberger, that will be on commercials and say, vote yes, this is important, support this measure, we're supporting it, this is the reason why, democracy hangs in the balance, all the reasons. But then you'll get something in the mail that says, no, President Obama and Governor Spanberger says no to gerrymandering. Well, what they did was, let me go to another one. Or you'll see commercials where they said they noted African Americans and historic voting rights struggle and say, your vote matters, and they're diluting your vote. Vote no for this measure. But you also had African Americans and others on television, in the neighborhood, in black churches, African American civil rights organizations, panel discussions, all saying vote yes. So what was right? Well, it was a little misinformation, but basically the opposition took inklings of truth and stretched it to make it a whole truth, which ended up being the untruth or misleading. Yes, the president and the governor were against gerrymandering. They said that. However, for this measure, this is not traditional gerrymandering in its sense, but it's simply a reaction to what the president did. And of course, there were some African Americans that were taken from traditional districts, such as Congressional District 3 and 4, which are led by Bobby Scott, congressman, the dean of the delegation, who is over 30 years in Congress and still looks good. The congressman is going to be 79 this April 30th. I mean, tremendous, sharp as a tack. I mean, the absolutely most brilliant congressman on the Hill. And then, of course, the first African-American woman to lead Congress or serving Congress for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that is Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan out of Richmond as being the seat. Now, with that being the case, think about it. Yeah, some of those African-American neighborhoods were put into other districts to make them more Democratic leaning, but those districts remain overwhelmingly majority minority or African-American. So what did that mean? They took a little bit of truth and put it and stretched it and caused it to be the untruth, or as my colleague said, a flat out lie. So, but with all of that misinformation, disinformation, with all of the money that poured into the Commonwealth over this position, yes still won out, and now we have Democrats with a 10-1. So that closes the book on that. So let's move forward now. Let's take a look at what this actually now means and what is the next step. Well, according to WTKR, Virginia voters approved the new congressional map that could give Democrats a 10-1 advantage. However, here we are, the next challenge. Opponents of this referendum are hoping the Virginia Supreme Court will intervene. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at the intervening measures, Democrats have said the map is a response to Republican efforts in other states that they're celebrating the results. Speaker Dunn Scott said, quote, "All we do is win no matter what." My guy, Speaker of the House. However, let's take a look at what the minority leader, the GOP House leader, was saying. House GOP or Republican leader Terry Kilgore, he said, quote, "We knew this was going to be hard. We're still fighting. We're still fighting the courts. We think we're going to win in the courts." Now, why is that? So take a look at it. There are 3 lawsuits that are currently challenging the referendum. So I'm going to take a look at 2, and then one that were filed before, and then one that was filed afterwards. 2 of them have reached the Virginia Supreme Court. Now, these 2 lawsuits, they argue that the General Assembly itself did not use the correct, quote-unquote, language on the ballot and didn't follow the, quote-unquote, proper procedure. As a matter of fact, Delegate Kilgore said that the language was so misleading. They didn't follow the statutes they were supposed to follow. There's a lot of missteps that happened during this process, so we feel comfortable moving on to the next phase. Now, in March, the court said that the election could still happen. Now, again, those 2 lawsuits were filed during the time of the General Assembly. So while the General Assembly was still in session, the legislature, they passed this measure day 1 of the General Assembly, and after they passed that measure, then they challenged it in the courts. It went straight to the, well, not straight, but it went to the Supreme Court after they challenged in the General District Court. Now, here's what happened. When you take a look at what took place, in March, the court said, like I said, the election still can happen. But there's going to be a hearing on these cases on tomorrow. So one of the cases will be heard by the Virginia Supreme Court on tomorrow. So we're going to be tuned in, and we're going to come back next week on Sunday and talk about the result of these legal challenges. But keep in mind, this is going to be heard ASAP, right? Now, that's not the only question, but some have questioned whether the court would get involved after the voters weighed in. But according to WTKR, it remains unclear exactly how they will proceed. Now, while you take a look at how they'll proceed, there are some things that are doctrines that the courts go around and abide by in order to avoid controversy, avoid the imbalance or the upsetting of government and the checks and balances. Again, we're talking traditional. We're not talking the Trump administration here that are rewriting the rules or ignoring the rules as far as getting their agenda across the board. They're in power. They have the power to do it, so they're doing it. But we're talking about traditional checks and balances, democracy. But sometimes courts will not rule on an issue because it's a political question. Sometimes courts will punt on it because of that. Sometimes courts will stay or hold before they rule on an issue to allow the legal process to run its course. And then once it runs its course, they either will avoid voting on it because the political process has run its course and they've spoken. And the issue becomes moot. So in this situation, it's more than, I think the court will look at that. This is a political issue. The people have voted. You got right at 3% of people that voted in this to say yes. That's over 100,000+ people that voted to say yes in this particular election. So I think they're going to say, this is just me, and this is my analysis, that this probably can't proceed because it is the voice of the people. But depending on whatever the court says, Speaker Scott, who has become the face of this issue, he said, we're going to let the court system play itself out, just like we abide by the will of the voters. We'll have to abide by the will of whatever the court says. So he said, quote, we're going to follow the rule of law. Now, I believe he said that because they are, but also there's another party and a president that leads that party that pretty much doesn't follow the rule of law. Now, WTKR also noted that while millions have now cast their ballots with the majority approving, opponents are holding on to the hope that the map itself will be thrown out. But what does that look like if the map is thrown out? If the map is thrown out, then that means that we go back to the original map. And if we go back to the original map, then that means that all of this was in vain. So that's why I say we may find where this is probably, again, something that the Virginia Supreme Court will pass on. But we'll see after this Monday. Let's take a look at the other case that was recently filed after the vote. Now, this was filed in Tazewell County, which, of course, the place where the other lawsuits were filed. And, of course, this is what we call a little forum shopping. So a Tazewell County judge declared that Virginia cannot certify the results of Tuesday's special election, according to WRIC, ABC News out of Richmond, which the voters approved a controversial proposal to redraw the state's congressional map. Now, of course, this is according to WRIC, due to several concerns about whether or not the effort is legal. So now they're looking at the legality here. So according to court documents, and this is obtained by Channel 8 News, which was filed on Wednesday, April 22nd, the day after the election, Tazewell Circuit Court Judge Jack Hurley ruled that Virginia Democrats' efforts to redraw the state's congressional map mid-decade were illegal on multiple counts. Now, he further declared that Virginia cannot certify the results of the referendum, which the vote was held Tuesday, April 21st, and that legislators can't take any action to implement the new map. Now, notably, as I stated before, other lawsuits were filed here that they're in the Virginia Supreme Court. WRIC notes that Judge Hurley is the same judge who blocked the proposal not once, but twice, leading up to the referendum date. So that's why we got the cases now in the Supreme Court. Now, how do we get here? Now, of course, we talked about the redistricting process itself, which WRC went over, but we're not going to go through there. However, Virginia, I want you to note what the Virginia Republicans are saying. Now, keep in mind, the Democrats are doing this simply as an answer to what the Republicans are doing countrywide, in the United States of America, based upon what the president has asked them to do. So Virginia Democrats, according to WRC, described the new map as an attempt to protect democracy. Again, this is after President Donald Trump successfully lobbied several Republican states to redraw their congressional maps to favor Republicans. So Virginia Republicans, on the other hand, have described it as gerrymandering or the intentional manipulation of electoral maps to unfairly put one party in power. Now, that's what they're calling Virginia's redrawing, not the redrawing of other states' districts by their party's leader, requested by their party's leader. So, again, when you take a look at this, you kind of like, is the, kettle calling the pot black here? However, when you take a look at what's happening, multiple lawsuits have been filed, including there's been one submitted by the RNC, which is the Republican National Committee, and also by the NRCC, which is the National Republican Congressional Committee, and also two Republican congressmen, which, of course, rightfully so, because they've lost their districts for the most part. But some of the same arguments have already been before the Supreme Court in Virginia. So what they're looking at is the RNC and the NRCC's lawsuit that Hurley ruled on Wednesday in this particular filing. So what did the judge say the Democrats went wrong? And this is very important because, again, this is the rationale of a sitting jurist. that is going to be appealed to the state Supreme Court. But the judge ruled entirely in favor of the RNC and NRCC and the two GOP congressmen. That's no surprise because he also stopped the same thing twice. But he said that according to Democrats, that efforts were illegal for a number of reasons. Number one, per the court documents, he said Democrats advanced a proposal during the 2024 special session of the General Assembly. However, there are strict rules as to what kind of legislation can be considered during these types of sessions. So Democrats, he says, reportedly violated those rules. As a result, any actions taken to advance the plan would be deemed illegal. He also said that further Virginia's Constitution dictates that a constitutional amendment like this is one supposed to be passed by two different General Assemblies, with the general election taking place in between. Before it is passed down to voters, he said that this did not happen. Additionally, the election should have begun no earlier than 90 days after the amendment was passed by the General Assembly. Instead, he said it was on March 6th when the bill was only passed in early February. Judge also ruled that the ballot language given to the voters was misleading. And he said it did not accurately describe the proposed amendment, the ballot language that was listed. He also said that as a result, now again, he said the ballot language, that it was misleading, but nobody questioned the misleading or misinformation of the Republican Party for the most part to this voting measure. But as a result, the judge ruled that all of the votes cast on Tuesday are, quote, ineffective, unquote, and the Virginia Department of Elections is not to certify the special election results, which he further declared that no actions can be taken to enact a proposal and redraw Virginia's congressional map. So, again, those are the issues that we currently have before the judge, and this is what's going to happen next. So Virginia's congressional map will not be redrawn at this time. So that's where we are while we have this legal challenge. And the others that the proposal faces continues to play out. Now, Attorney General Jay Jones issued a statement Wednesday saying that he will be appealing to Hurley's decision, and his statement reads as follows. Quote, my office will immediately file an appeal in the Court of Appeals. As I said last night, meaning after the election, after this was filed. He said, Virginia voters have spoken. As an activist judge should not have the veto power over the people's vote. He said, we look forward to defending the outcome of last night's election in court. So this is RNC versus Koski, the final judgment. You can read that, look that up for yourself. So that's where we stand in the Commonwealth. The people have spoken. 10-1, they want it. All right. 10-1, they want this to move forward. Right at 3% margin of victory. So that's over 100,000 votes. That's a lot of votes in favor of this measure. To put it in perspective, once again, this is on the heels of the gubernatorial election where over 3.4 million voters spoke. And now we have over, again, 3.1 million voters that are spoken. So what does this mean moving forward on a national scale? Well, right now, of course, there's a lot of outrage on the Republican side, and everyone's calling this unfair. Now, mind you, this is kind of backfiring a little bit because you've got 4 Republican states that have done the exact same thing. The only difference is those states, Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, they didn't put it before the people. They drew it themselves. They didn't give the people a voice. But California and Virginia actually did. So what does this mean moving forward? According to the Brookings Institute, they're asking the question, will Virginia be the final mid-decade redistricting battle? So according to Brookings, April 23rd, 2026 article, as it stands, the 2026 mid-decade redistricting battles may have resulted in as many as 9 new Republican seats and 10 new Democratic seats. Now, we mentioned Texas did 5, California did 5 to combat it. We mentioned that Ohio, Missouri, and North Carolina did 4, redrew 4 districts, and Virginia answered with 4. So where does that one additional seat come from? From the Democrats. Well, Utah. So there's a case out there pending where the legislative body in Utah wanted to basically create congressional districts that favored all Republicans, so all four. Court said no, so more than likely there will be a district that favors a Democrat in the state of Utah. And that is life-changing because Utah has been a very reliable conservative state out in the West, which it still is, 3-1. I mean, it's pretty solid. That definitely wins you a 5-game series. It definitely gives you an advantage in a 7-game series, right? So, but with that, historical data suggests that mid-decade redistricting is the most common when congressional majorities are thin and fluctuate from one election to the next. Now, the legal and political precedents set in 2026, and this is where I want to head to, in combination with the razor-thin House margins, this could usher in a new era of mid-decade redistricting as each party scrambles to carve out seats that will secure a majority. Now, that's something that we find to be, at least myself, something that is different in our democracy. Rewriting the rule books when the rules don't favor the majority anymore is something that in America we see happen all the time, right? As individuals who are non-majority or what they call minority, every time the set of rules are created and you meet or exceed those rules and you beat out the majority, then the rules are changed. We see it in sports when dunking was taken out of the game. Therefore, they created the finger roll, Iceman, George Gervin. When it says you need a degree to get this job and you have now a minority population of black women who are more highly degreed than any other demographic in America, then they say, well, you need the experience. So again, it's to keep moving, but you can't get the experience unless you get the job, right? But keep moving the marker, changing the rules when the rules don't work for the majority. That's what the Republicans have done, and that's what the president saw. And, of course, he's one that ignores rules and changes them when they fit him and all the things. So this is something that we'll pick up later. I don't want to really deal with that now because we're kind of in the throes of this redistricting and the response to it. So, but what we're finding is that right now the rules are being changed. Now, what I believe could happen moving forward, this is me. If I'm advising on policy, which I do, I would say that Congress needs to create legislation in order to provide redistricting only at the end of every decade. This mid-decade cannot sustain because the voters, man, I mean, the people are just not happy with the way that our Congress can't get along, or not happy with the way that the majority in power are creating and changing rules to fit their narrative. Set the rules, play the game, and may the best person win. That's how democracy works. 50+1. So with that, we're going to, again, monitor these cases, which will be heard tomorrow. We'll come back next week. We'll talk about them, and then we'll delve a little bit more into the response nationwide and see where we're at. But again, this has been a very wild journey into this special election, but we're not done yet. And if I'm right, you'll stick with us here on Stay in the Water, where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. And until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.